In the quiet, cramped apartment of Marcus Knight, the paintbrush danced with a purpose. His room, barely large enough to fit a single bed and a small desk, was cluttered with canvases, brushes, and scattered tubes of paint. The air was thick with the scent of oil and turpentine, a fragrance that had become as much a part of him as his thoughts. He was used to the tight quarters, the solitude, and the battle with uncertainty. But despite the lack of space and the noise of the outside world, Marcus found peace in his art. Marcus had always been an artist. His talent was undeniable from a young age, his ability to capture emotions on canvas far beyond his years. Yet, in a world where the value of art was often dictated by the status of the artist rather than the work itself, he had struggled to make his mark. His journey had been a constant uphill battle, battling self-doubt, rejection, and the dismissive attitudes of gallery owners who saw him as nothing more than another black artist with a story to tell. His work was bold, expressive, and unapologetically real, but in the eyes of the elite art world, it was too raw, too unrefined, and, above all, too black. It wasn't just that his paintings didn't sell. It was the constant stream of passive-aggressive rejections, the raised eyebrows, and the polite dismissals that wore him down over time. He had approached countless galleries in New York, his portfolio of striking, vivid art ready to prove his worth. But time and time again, he was met with indifferent gallery owners who acted as though they were doing him a favor by even taking a look at his work. They called his pieces interesting or unique, but there was always an undercurrent of doubt, a sense that they saw him, not as an artist, but as a problem to be solved. "You'll need to adjust your palette to something more commercial," one owner had said to him just last week, his eyes scanning Marcus's work with feigned interest. "We need something that will sell to the elite, something they can hang in their penthouses without causing too much discomfort." The words echoed in Marcus's mind. But Marcus wasn't interested in adjusting for anyone. His work was his voice. It spoke of pain, of identity, of history, of struggles that many chose to ignore. His paintings were a mirror to the world he lived in, a world that often felt unforgiving and dismissive. He refused to paint for anyone's comfort but his own. On this particular morning, as sunlight streamed through the window and bathed his tiny room in golden hues, Marcus found himself staring at his latest piece. It was a bold and powerful portrait of a black woman, her eyes fierce and unyielding, as if daring anyone to challenge her. Her skin was painted in a rich, warm tone that almost seemed to glow from within, and her lips were set in a firm line that spoke of generations of resilience. She was his symbol of defiance, defiance against a world that often tried to define her, and by extension, him, in ways that weren't true. Marcus had poured his soul into this painting. Every stroke, every layer, every color was a deliberate act of rebellion. This wasn't just a piece of art. This was a statement. He was proud of it. Yet, in the back of his mind, there was that nagging doubt. Would anyone else see its value? Would anyone else understand the raw emotion it conveyed? Or would it, like all his other pieces, be rejected, mocked, and left to collect dust? He had spent hours researching galleries, composing emails, and printing out proposals, only to receive nothing but silence in return. But Marcus wasn't one to give up easily. He was determined to see his work in a gallery, to see his name recognized, and to prove that he belonged in the same room as the artists who were celebrated by the world's top collectors. After finishing his breakfast, a hurried bowl of cereal, he grabbed the canvas and carefully wrapped it in protective plastic. He wasn't sure where he was going to go today, but he knew he couldn't stay in this room much longer. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating him with their lack of opportunity. There had to be someone out there who would see the worth in his work. He grabbed his coat, slung the portfolio over his shoulder, and stepped out into the cold New York morning. The city was buzzing with life, the streets teeming with people going about their business, but to Marcus, it all felt like a blur. His thoughts were consumed with what awaited him. He had an appointment at an upscale gallery later that afternoon, a gallery that catered to the rich and powerful. He wasn't sure if they would appreciate his style, but he had to try. There was no other choice. As he walked through the busy streets of Manhattan, he passed by other galleries, some of which he had visited before, where he had been politely turned away. He looked at the art displayed in the windows, beautiful, polished, and often shallow. He saw expensive paintings of serene landscapes, abstract designs that required no thought, and portraits that lacked any real emotion. It was all so sterile, so refined, so safe. And he was anything but safe. The hours dragged on as Marcus made his way through the city, his nerves tightening with each step. He had walked into countless galleries before, each time hoping for a different outcome. But today felt different. There was something in the air, a sense of anticipation, of possibility. He just had to believe in his work, in himself, no matter how much the world told him otherwise. When he finally arrived at the gallery, he took a deep breath before stepping inside. The sleek, modern interior of the space was pristine, almost clinical. The gallery owner, a well-dressed middle-aged man named Richard, greeted him with a smile that seemed more rehearsed than genuine. "Marcus Knight, right? I've heard of you," Richard said, his tone bordering on condescending. "Let's see what you've got." He motioned for Marcus to set up his portfolio on a nearby table. Marcus opened the portfolio carefully, revealing his work. The paintings, some vibrant and bold, others more somber, filled the space with an electric energy. He watched Richard's face closely, waiting for any sign of recognition, any spark of interest. Richard scanned the pieces quickly, his eyes darting from one to the next. A few seconds passed before he spoke. "Interesting," he said, his voice devoid of enthusiasm. "But I'm not sure it's quite what we're looking for here. We need something that will appeal to a broader audience." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had heard these words before. "I think your work is a bit too raw," Richard continued. "We have clients who want something more polished, something that fits with the decor of their high-rise apartments. Perhaps you could try something a little more commercial?" Marcus clenched his jaw but remained silent. He had heard this all before, the unspoken message that his art was too much for the elite world of fine art, too real for their tastes. Richard wasn't interested in his voice, his struggle, or his story. He just wanted something that would sell. "I appreciate you taking the time," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the rising anger inside. He gathered his portfolio and stood up, walking out of the gallery with his head held high. As he left the building and stepped back into the cold streets of New York, his heart sank. But even in the face of rejection, Marcus wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't. His art was his soul, and if the world wouldn't accept it, then he would find another way. He had no choice. The gallery owner may have turned him away today, but Marcus knew one thing for certain: one day, they would all see the worth of his work. One day, they would regret the moment they dismissed him. The next few days were a blur of emotions for Marcus. After the humiliating encounter at the gallery, he retreated into his apartment, isolating himself from the outside world. His usual burst of creativity seemed to stall, as though the rejection had drained him of energy. But that was the way it always went for Marcus. After the sting of rejection, there came a moment of reflection and then, inevitably, a renewed determination. His art was worth something. He was worth something. He just had to keep fighting. On the third day after his latest rejection, a new opportunity appeared. Marcus had heard about another gallery in Soho, one that had recently gained a reputation for showcasing rising stars. Word on the street was that it was owned by an influential art dealer named Evelyn Carter. She had built her name on discovering unique artists and putting them on the map. For some reason, the art world respected her, and that gave Marcus a glimmer of hope. After much deliberation, Marcus decided to make one last attempt before giving up. He grabbed his portfolio, filled with his latest collection, and set off for the gallery. He had been in this situation before, where he convinced himself it was the final time, only to find himself standing in front of yet another door that refused to open. But this time, something felt different. There was a new resolve in him, a quiet confidence that he wasn't sure where it came from, but he trusted it. As he approached the gallery, the sleek modern design of the building seemed to radiate wealth and exclusivity. The large windows displayed exquisite pieces of art, works that were elegant and sophisticated. There was a stark contrast between what was on display and what Marcus had just witnessed in the world outside these walls. In those windows were the same sterile landscapes and minimalist sculptures that made him feel invisible, as though his voice wasn't meant to be heard. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The gallery's interior was just as lavish as its exterior, but this time, Marcus couldn't let himself feel intimidated. He walked up to the reception desk, where a young woman with an air of polished professionalism greeted him. "Hello, how can I help you?" she asked, her eyes flickering to the portfolio Marcus was holding under his arm. "I have some artwork I'd like to present to Mrs. Carter," Marcus replied. His voice sounded steady, but internally, his heart was pounding. "Mrs. Carter is busy right now, but I can arrange a meeting for you," the receptionist said. "If you'd like, you can wait in our lounge area." Marcus nodded, though he was uncertain how much good waiting would do. He had no appointment. No pre-scheduled slot. This could very well turn out to be another fruitless trip, but something told him he had to stay. For the first time in a long time, he felt the overwhelming pull of destiny, as though this moment had been a long time coming. He was ushered into a minimalist lounge area adorned with sculptures and low lighting. A few other visitors were milling around, glancing at art books or chatting softly about the pieces on display. The space was quiet, almost reverent. Marcus sat down and took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He tried to ignore the nagging voice in his head that warned him this might end in another rejection, but he refused to listen. He couldn't afford to. He was ready. More than ready. After a few moments, the receptionist came back, this time with a woman by her side. Evelyn Carter was a striking figure, tall, with an aura of calm confidence. Her sharp features were framed by platinum blonde hair, and she wore a tailored black dress that somehow made her look both chic and intimidating. She extended her hand to Marcus with a smile that seemed warm but professional. "Marcus Knight, I presume," she said, her voice smooth and composed. "Yes, that's me," Marcus replied, shaking her hand. There was a sense of awe in him, but he tried not to let it show. "I've heard a bit about you," Evelyn continued, "but I'm curious to see the work for myself. Shall we take a look?" Without waiting for Marcus to answer, she led him to a side room filled with large, open spaces to display artwork. The walls were lined with pristine white paint, and the light fixtures highlighted each piece like they were precious artifacts. In the center of the room was a pedestal, upon which a painting by a famous contemporary artist rested. Marcus felt a strange sense of nervousness bubble up inside him, but he followed Evelyn as she guided him to another wall. "Place your portfolio here," she said, gesturing to the table. Marcus laid the case down, his hands trembling slightly. He could feel the weight of her gaze as she waited for him to open it. Taking a deep breath, he slowly opened the portfolio, revealing his art one piece at a time. Each painting was a manifestation of his soul, each one telling a story of struggle, identity, and the resilience of his people. Evelyn didn't speak as she looked over each piece. She didn't make any remarks or nod in approval. The silence stretched on, and Marcus started to feel a wave of discomfort. His heart beat faster as he anticipated her next words. "Interesting," she said at last, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied the paintings. "You have a unique style. It's not the typical kind of work we showcase here, but there's something raw about it. The emotion is undeniable." Marcus bit his lip, waiting for her to say more. The silence felt oppressive now, like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether he would be pushed over or pulled back to safety. Finally, Evelyn spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "You're obviously talented. But here, we cater to a very specific kind of buyer. Someone who enjoys art but doesn't want to be challenged by it. What you're offering, well, it's bold. It might alienate some of our clients." Marcus's stomach churned. This was the moment. Another chance for rejection. Another dismissal of his voice. Another brush off, packaged with polite words. He could feel his shoulders tense, ready for the inevitable. But then, something surprising happened. Evelyn's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough for Marcus to notice. She stepped closer to one of the paintings, tilting her head to the side, as if seeing it for the first time. "I'm intrigued," she said, her tone now more measured. "I'm willing to take a risk. Your work, it's going to need a certain kind of buyer, someone with a deep understanding of art, not just for the sake of aesthetics, but for its cultural significance. But I see potential here." Marcus blinked. Did she really just say that? "Let me make one thing clear, though," she continued. "I'm not promising you anything. If you want to make it in this industry, you'll need to do more than just create art. You'll need to learn how to sell it. And, in the end, it's not about your talent. It's about what people are willing to pay for it." Marcus nodded, understanding the stakes. She wasn't handing him a free pass, but at least there was an opening now. This was a crack in the door, a small chance, but it was something. "You're right," he said, trying to keep the nervousness out of his voice. "I'm willing to learn. Whatever it takes." Evelyn smiled again, though it was far from warm. "Good. We'll set up a formal meeting next week. You can bring more pieces, and we'll discuss the next steps." As Marcus left the gallery that day, he felt a strange mix of excitement and disbelief. He had just taken the first step toward what could be the break of a lifetime. The gallery owner had seen potential in his work, something that had been so hard to get others to recognize. And now, for the first time, Marcus felt like he was on the verge of something bigger than himself. In the following weeks, Marcus found himself caught between cautious optimism and the harsh reality of the art world. Evelyn had offered him a sliver of hope, and although it wasn't a guarantee, it felt like a validation of his struggle. He spent the next few days refining his portfolio, adding new pieces that pushed his creative limits even further. He wanted to present a full spectrum of his artistic vision, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically his. No more compromises. Evelyn had made it clear, if he was going to succeed, he would have to be more than just an artist. He would have to sell his vision, sell himself. Marcus found that concept difficult. The artist in him wanted to stay true to his craft, but he knew that the art world wasn't just about creating masterpieces. It was about understanding the business, the market, and how to navigate the narrow, sometimes treacherous path that led to recognition. So, Marcus worked tirelessly, spending countless hours in his small apartment, experimenting with new techniques and colors. His paintings became more intense, each piece infused with a sense of urgency, a feeling of impending change. He painted not only for himself, but for the world that had so long overlooked him. The raw emotion in his work became more pronounced, and as he painted, he started to feel as though his own soul was being laid bare with every stroke. Then, just as he was preparing for his meeting with Evelyn, a phone call came that would change everything. It was late one evening when Marcus's phone buzzed with a call from a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," he said, trying to mask the apprehension in his voice. "Is this Marcus Knight?" The voice on the other end was smooth, almost formal, but there was a note of urgency in it that immediately caught his attention. "Yes, it is." "Who's this?" Marcus asked, now on alert. "My name is Isaac Patel," the voice continued. "I'm an art collector, and I've recently come across your work. I have to say, I'm very impressed with what I've seen. I believe there's something special here. I'd like to discuss the possibility of acquiring several pieces for a private collection." Marcus felt his heart race. A collector? His mind raced with possibilities. Was this some sort of joke? The idea that someone had not only seen his work, but found it valuable enough to want to buy it, was almost too much to process. "Wait, are you serious?" Marcus asked, barely able to contain his excitement. "You've seen my work?" "Yes, I've seen several of your paintings, and I believe your art is precisely what's missing in the current market. It speaks volumes about culture, identity, and resilience. Something the world is craving. I've been speaking to a few of my colleagues, and they share the same view. I'd like to set up a meeting to discuss terms." For a moment, Marcus could only sit in stunned silence. This wasn't just a chance to sell a piece or two, it was an opportunity to change everything. His heart pounded in his chest, his thoughts running wild with the implications of what was happening. A private collection? High-end collectors? His work could be showcased alongside some of the most famous names in the industry. This was the validation he had been fighting for. Of course, yes. Marcus finally managed to say, still reeling from the news. I'd love to meet. When and where? Isaac gave him the details, an address in a prestigious art district downtown, and arranged to meet the following afternoon. After the call ended, Marcus sat in stunned silence, staring at the phone in his hand. For a brief moment, the walls of his small apartment felt far away, as though he had suddenly stepped into a new world. The following day, Marcus dressed in his best clothes, a dark, tailored suit that he hoped would give off an air of professionalism without compromising his individuality. His mind was racing with thoughts of what to expect. Would the collector like his work in person as much as he did on paper? Would his art still resonate with someone who had the power to shape the narrative of his career? When he arrived at the address Isaac had given him, he was greeted by a sleek building with large glass windows. Inside, the gallery was filled with modern sculptures and works from various contemporary artists. The atmosphere was one of quiet luxury, high ceilings, minimalist decor, and the kind of quiet reverence that was reserved for rare and valuable pieces of art. The whole place smelled of wealth and exclusivity. Isaac Patel, a man in his late 40s, was waiting for him in the lobby. He wore a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly combed, and his demeanor exuded authority and sophistication. He gave Marcus a firm handshake and led him into a private viewing room. I must say, Marcus, Isaac began as they walked through the gallery. Your work is nothing short of extraordinary. It has a vibrancy and energy that most contemporary art lacks. There's something visceral about it, something that cuts through the noise of what's considered fashionable or marketable today. Your art doesn't just occupy space, it demands it. Marcus felt a surge of pride. These were the kinds of words he had longed to hear, but never dared to believe would come from someone with influence. Isaac continued, I have a network of collectors, all of whom are looking for something real. Something that speaks to the current climate. What I'm seeing in your work is the kind of raw authenticity that people are desperate to connect with. You've got something here that transcends art, its cultural commentary. Its history. And it's powerful. Marcus felt his stomach twist with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. All this time, he had been told that his art was too bold, too raw. Yet here, in front of one of the most respected collectors in the industry, his work was being praised for exactly the things that had once been deemed flaws. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought it would be seen like this. I've always believed in my work, but... Isaac smiled knowingly. But you weren't sure if anyone else would. I understand that. I've been there myself. The two men spent the next hour discussing Marcus's work, its themes, the personal experiences that inspired it, and how it could be positioned within the larger art world. Isaac was clear that Marcus's pieces weren't going to be a quick sell, they would need to find the right audience. But that audience was out there. Isaac was confident that the market was finally ready for art that wasn't just about decoration but about making a statement. We're prepared to make you an offer for several pieces of your work, Isaac said, as their conversation wound down. We'd like to acquire them for one of my high-profile collections. We believe your art has the potential to not just sell, it has the potential to shape the narrative of contemporary art. And you'll be paid accordingly. I'm talking millions, Marcus. This is your chance. Marcus's head swam with the magnitude of what Isaac was saying. Millions? The validation he had longed for was now in his grasp. He was no longer a struggling artist, he was someone whose work had a place in the world's most coveted collections. He had reached a point where his art was no longer something to be marginalized or ignored. It was something to be celebrated. As Marcus walked out of the gallery that day, his heart was light, but his mind was overwhelmed with the enormity of what had just happened. He had come to the gallery as an artist, unsure of whether his work would ever be truly seen. And now, he was leaving with an offer that would change everything, an offer that validated not just his talent, but his identity, his struggles, and everything he had poured into his paintings. His work had been discovered for its true worth. And now, the world was about to find out what it had been missing all along. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind of meetings, contracts, and preparation. Marcus had never imagined his life could change so rapidly, but here he was, navigating the fine art world with the help of Isaac Patel, the well-established collector who had taken an interest in his work. The excitement and validation Marcus had felt in the initial meeting with Isaac had gradually morphed into something more complex. The bright future he had dreamed of was finally within his reach, but it came with a price he was still trying to understand. After the initial offer, Isaac had introduced Marcus to several influential figures in the art world. From gallerists to curators, critics to fellow artists, Marcus found himself surrounded by people who had the power to make or break his career. He quickly realized that this was no longer just about painting, it was about managing his image, positioning himself within the market, and knowing how to navigate a world where money, influence, and reputation ruled over creativity. The contracts were the first hurdle. While Isaac had reassured him that the deals were standard in the industry, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into a system that didn't always align with his artistic values. There were clauses about exclusivity, about limits on where and how he could exhibit his work, and, most troubling of all, about the control that Isaac and his partners would have over the pricing of his art. You see, Marcus, Isaac had explained during their final meeting, the art market isn't like other markets. It's not just about the quality of the work, but about its perceived value. We've got to build a story around your work, create a narrative that people will buy into. And once that narrative is in place, the value of your pieces will grow. It's all part of the branding process. Marcus listened, trying to absorb everything. He had never thought of his art as a brand before, but now it seemed that everything was about the brand. His work wasn't just about expressing his emotions or telling his story, it was about selling an idea, about creating an image that people wanted to buy into. That was a concept he hadn't fully grasped when he first entered the art world, and it made him uneasy. But what about the authenticity of my work? Marcus asked, his voice hesitant. What happens if the narrative that gets built around it doesn't feel true to what I created? Isaac smiled, but there was a knowing glint in his eyes. Marcus, the story we tell around your work will be true to its essence. It will represent what you stand for, what you've experienced as an artist. But it's also a product. And like any product, it has to be positioned in a way that makes it desirable. People will buy your art not just because they like it, they'll buy it because they want to be part of something bigger, part of a movement. Your art will become a symbol, a statement. Marcus wasn't sure if he liked the sound of it. The idea of being a symbol was both empowering and terrifying. Could he retain his integrity while being molded into something that appealed to the masses? Was there room for both? Or would he have to sacrifice his authenticity to fit into the commercialized art world? Despite his doubts, Marcus signed the contracts. The money was staggering, more than he had ever made from his paintings in his life. It was enough to put him in the same league as some of the most famous artists in the world. But the numbers on the page were only a small part of the equation. What really weighed on his mind was what the success would cost him. Would it cost him his soul? The first gallery showing came and went with overwhelming success. Marcus's paintings, once dismissed as too bold, too raw, now hung in the prestigious gallery, each one surrounded by a crowd of eager collectors and critics. The buzz around his work was palpable, and people seemed genuinely fascinated by the narrative that Isaac had carefully crafted. His art, once relegated to the margins, was now positioned as the next big thing in the contemporary art world. But as the applause and praise poured in, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a pressure that he hadn't anticipated, the constant need to produce more, to be more. His art had become a commodity, something that had to be constantly in demand, constantly on display. Every decision he made was scrutinized by agents, curators, and collectors. They wanted more of the same, more pieces that fit the narrative, more work that tapped into the same themes of identity, struggle, and resilience. "Marcus, we need you to create something new for the Paris exhibition," one of Isaac's colleagues, a slick agent named Jennifer, told him one afternoon. "Something bigger. Something that will make a statement. We're thinking a large-scale installation piece. We want to show the world that you're not just an artist, you're an icon. This is your moment to make history." The weight of the expectation pressed down on him. He had always found solace in the quiet solitude of his studio, the freedom to create what he wanted, when he wanted. But now, his time felt like it was no longer his own. The pressure to meet deadlines, to fulfill requests from collectors and gallery owners, had replaced the joy of creation. As the days passed, Marcus began to feel like a puppet. He was no longer the artist, he was the product. His work, his vision, had been taken and shaped into something that could sell. And in that process, a part of him began to fade. His original voice, the one that had once been so powerful and raw, felt distant and muted. He found himself questioning whether this success was worth the sacrifice. One evening, after another long day of meetings and phone calls, Marcus stood in front of one of his larger pieces in the gallery, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. The painting was everything Isaac had wanted, bold, dramatic, and carefully curated. It represented everything Marcus had fought for, the pain of struggle, the triumph of identity, the resilience of his people. But as he stared at it, he felt a disconnect. This painting, this piece of art, was no longer just his, it was a product of the system that had taken over his life. The raw emotion that had once fueled his work now felt diluted by the demands of the art world. He could see the money in the eyes of the people who admired his art, collectors who valued his work not because of what it meant, but because of what it could do for them. They wanted to own a piece of history. They wanted to be part of the narrative. But Marcus couldn't help but feel like he was no longer a part of it. He had been swept into a current that was much larger than he was, and now he was struggling to hold on to the very thing that had made him an artist in the first place. The realization hit him hard, he was caught in a system that prized profit over authenticity, fame over truth. The art world, with all its prestige and glamour, had a dark side, a side that exploited the very essence of what it claimed to celebrate. And in that moment, Marcus wondered, had he sold out? Was his success truly his own, or had it been manufactured by those who saw only dollar signs in his work? The days following that night were filled with restless thought. Marcus continued to fulfill his commitments, producing new works for the gallery and preparing for the upcoming exhibitions. But with each stroke of the brush, he felt further from the artist he had once been. His passion was still there, but it had become clouded by the pressures of the art world. His authenticity, once the core of his identity, now seemed like a distant memory. The question remained, was the price of success too high? Was the recognition, the wealth, and the fame worth the loss of his true self? Only time would tell. As the months passed, Marcus's fame continued to grow. His paintings were sold at astronomical prices, and he was invited to prestigious art festivals and shows. Invitations to interview with art critics, magazines, and media outlets flooded in, and his work began to hang in some of the most famous galleries in the world. Yet, despite the recognition and success, Marcus felt increasingly detached from the work he was creating. The passion that had once driven him seemed to fade with each new commission, each exhibition. At the height of his success, Marcus received an invitation to showcase his work at the Art Basel Fair in Switzerland, a monumental event for any artist. It was the pinnacle of the art world, and securing a spot meant that his work would be seen by some of the most powerful figures in the industry. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and for any other artist, it would have been a dream come true. But for Marcus, it felt more like a trap. The pressure to conform to expectations had reached its peak. Isaac had been pushing him to create a new series of paintings that would cater to the high-end collectors, a series that reflected the themes of identity and struggle that had become so synonymous with his work. He'd lost count of how many times Isaac or Jennifer had called him, urging him to meet the brand guidelines that would ensure his success in this elite circle. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus felt suffocated. He had once painted because it was a way to express his deepest emotions, his personal history, his vision of the world. But now, it felt as though he was painting to please others, to fulfill a demand, to make sure the checks kept coming in. The work he had done for the past year was good, technically flawless, even, but it no longer felt like his own. It felt like a product, manufactured to fit a mold. One day, after another exhausting meeting with Isaac and Jennifer, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change. He had been swept into the current of the art world, and it was carrying him further and further from the artist he had once been. The excitement and joy he had once felt in his studio now seemed like distant memories, and he knew he had to reclaim that feeling before it was lost forever. That night, he walked through the streets of New York, seeking clarity. The city, bustling and alive with energy, mirrored the chaos he felt inside. As he passed the familiar streets, his mind raced, thinking about his roots, where he had started, what had driven him to paint in the first place. He thought about his mother, who had always supported his dream even when others told him it was foolish. He remembered the countless hours he had spent sketching in his small apartment, not knowing if anyone would ever see his work, let alone buy it. In a quiet corner of the city, he found a small park and sat down on a bench, looking out over the skyline. The city seemed so far away, yet so close, like a reflection of everything he had become. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He needed to reconnect with himself, with his passion, and with the reason he had started painting in the first place. The next day, Marcus made a decision. He would turn down the Art Basel offer. It wasn't an easy choice. The opportunity was monumental, and turning it down meant walking away from everything he had worked for. The success, the recognition, the money, all of it would slip through his fingers. But he had come to realize that all of that meant little if he wasn't creating work that truly spoke to him. He called Isaac the next morning, his heart pounding in his chest. Isaac answered on the first ring. "Marcus, I've got some great news. Art Basel is confirmed, and we're pushing for an even bigger feature this year. The gallery's going to love this. We need you to start on that new series right away," Isaac said, his voice upbeat and confident. Marcus paused for a moment, letting the weight of the decision settle in. He took a deep breath and replied, "I appreciate everything you've done for me, Isaac. The exposure, the opportunities, it's been amazing. But I can't do it. I'm not going to show at Art Basel." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus could hear Isaac shifting in his seat, as though he didn't quite understand what was happening. "Wait, what? Marcus, you're turning it down? This is the opportunity of a lifetime. We've built your reputation up to this point. This is how you solidify your legacy. You've got a responsibility to your career, to your audience, hell, to your collectors. This is the big time." "I know," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "But I've lost sight of why I started painting in the first place. I can't keep making art just to please other people. It's not me anymore. I need to find my voice again, and that means stepping away from this world." There was another long pause, and for the first time, Marcus heard a hint of frustration in Isaac's voice. "You're making a mistake, Marcus. You have no idea how rare these opportunities are. You'll regret this, trust me." "I don't think I will," Marcus said, his decision solidifying in his mind. "It's not worth it anymore. I need to go back to creating art for myself. I have to find what makes me passionate again, even if it means walking away from everything." The conversation ended with Isaac's reluctant agreement, and Marcus hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. He had freed himself from the constraints of the art world and reclaimed his autonomy as an artist. In the weeks that followed, Marcus found a new sense of purpose. He returned to his old apartment, the place where he had started his journey. The walls, once bare, were now lined with his work, unfinished pieces that had been gathering dust for too long. He began to paint again, this time with a renewed sense of freedom. No longer concerned with meeting expectations or adhering to a marketable image, he painted what he felt. His work became raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically his own. For the first time in months, Marcus was creating for the sake of creation. He no longer cared about whether it would sell or whether it would be featured in a high-profile gallery. He was painting because it was his truth, and that was all that mattered. The world would eventually notice, he knew. Art had a way of speaking for itself, and his work was too powerful, too real, to be ignored for long. But for now, Marcus was content. He had rediscovered the essence of what made him an artist, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his soul. In the end, Marcus realized that true success wasn't about selling out or conforming to the expectations of others. It was about staying true to oneself, no matter the cost. And in that realization, he found peace. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus continued to embrace his new path. He was no longer bound by the expectations of the art world that had once overwhelmed him. Instead, he was carving out his own journey, one that prioritized authenticity, self-expression, and the joy of creating. He had made peace with his decision, but the road ahead was not without its challenges. The art world had moved on without him. His name was no longer trending in high-profile galleries or art auctions. The media attention had faded, and the collectors who once clamored for his work now seemed distant, uninterested. Isaac had tried to reach out a few times, but Marcus had turned down his calls. He had made his choice, and now it was time to fully embrace it. Yet, there were moments when doubt would creep in. The pressure of financial instability, the fear of being forgotten, and the realization that he had left behind a world that had promised so much, all of these things weighed on him. His bank account, once flush with the proceeds from sold works, was starting to dwindle. He had stopped producing at the pace the industry demanded, and his savings were beginning to run low. Still, Marcus pressed forward, determined to stick to his new vision. One evening, as he sat in his studio, a familiar figure walked through the door, Tasha, his old college friend and fellow artist. Tasha had always been one of the few people who truly understood Marcus. She had been there during the early days, when he was struggling to make a name for himself. They had painted side by side in their small apartments, both hoping for a break, both fighting against the odds to be recognized. "I heard you've been working on some new stuff," Tasha said, her eyes scanning the canvases scattered around the room. "This is different. I haven't seen you create like this in a long time." Marcus smiled, the familiar warmth of her presence easing some of the tension that had built up over the past few months. "Yeah, it's been a journey. A lot of changes, a lot of struggles. But I feel like I'm finally finding my voice again." Tasha nodded thoughtfully, her gaze lingering on one of Marcus's larger pieces. It was a stark contrast to the polished, marketable work he had done in the past. The brushstrokes were rough, unrefined, and yet there was a rawness to it that spoke of personal truth. It was a portrayal of a man caught between two worlds, the world of commercial success and the world of personal authenticity. The figure was torn, fragmented, yet powerful in its defiance. "I can see it," Tasha said softly. "This is the work you were meant to make. It's real, Marcus. It's you." Her words hit him harder than he expected. She was right. This was the art he had always wanted to make. It was messy, it was vulnerable, and it was unapologetic. It wasn't about selling a story, it wasn't about fitting into a market, it was about him, his experiences, and his truth. "I'm scared, Tasha," Marcus admitted, his voice shaky. "I walked away from everything, the fame, the money, the recognition. And now, I'm just here, trying to figure out what's next. What if no one cares about this? What if I'm just irrelevant now?" Tasha stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not irrelevant, Marcus. You've got something real to say. People will always care about that, even if it takes time for them to catch up. Don't measure your worth by what the market says. Measure it by how true you stay to yourself." Her words, simple yet powerful, resonated deeply within him. He had spent so much of his life chasing external validation, trying to prove himself to the world. But now, for the first time in a long while, Marcus realized that the only validation that mattered was his own. Determined to stay true to his newfound purpose, Marcus began to explore new avenues for sharing his work. He decided to create an online presence that was entirely his own, a space where he could showcase his art on his terms, without the interference of agents, gallerists, or critics. He launched a personal website, where he posted not only images of his work but also personal stories and reflections on his creative process. It was a place for his followers to understand his art from his perspective, to see the vulnerability behind each piece, and to connect with him on a deeper level. The response was slower than he had hoped. At first, the website garnered only a handful of visitors. But Marcus wasn't discouraged. He knew that building a genuine following took time, and he wasn't in a rush. He began to engage more with his small community, responding to comments, sharing behind-the-scenes glimpses into his studio, and even offering online workshops where he could teach aspiring artists about the power of self-expression. As time went on, the community around his work grew. His followers appreciated the authenticity of his message, and they were drawn to the raw energy of his paintings. They saw in his art something real, something that wasn't designed for the market, something that spoke to them on a personal level. Word of mouth spread, and slowly but surely, Marcus's name began to rise again, but this time, it was on his own terms. In addition to his online presence, Marcus began collaborating with other artists who shared his values. Together, they organized exhibitions that were less about selling and more about creating a platform for meaningful dialogue. They invited artists from diverse backgrounds to showcase their work, and the events became a celebration of creativity, freedom, and self-expression. It wasn't about pleasing the elite or conforming to the market, it was about creating a space where art could flourish without compromise. One day, a young artist named Zoe, who had been following Marcus's work online, reached out to him with a proposal. She was hosting an art show in a small community gallery and wanted Marcus to be one of the featured artists. The theme of the show was Reclaiming Your Voice, and Zoe had specifically chosen Marcus because of his journey of personal transformation. She believed his story could inspire others to embrace their authenticity and stay true to their creative vision, no matter the obstacles. Marcus was humbled by the invitation. It was a reminder that, despite the challenges he had faced, his work still had the power to resonate with others. He agreed to participate in the show, and it turned out to be one of the most rewarding experiences of his career. The night of the exhibition, the gallery was filled with people who were not just there to buy art, they were there to connect with the message. The crowd was diverse, the energy palpable, and there was a sense of unity among the artists and the viewers. They were all there for the same reason, to celebrate the authenticity of creative expression. As Marcus stood in the center of the gallery, watching people interact with his paintings, he felt a sense of peace that he had not known in years. He had found a new purpose, not in the glitz and glamour of the art world, but in the connections he had made with people who truly understood the meaning of his work. Marcus's journey had come full circle. He had gone from the pressures of commercial success to the quiet confidence of creating art that was deeply meaningful to him. He had rediscovered his roots as an artist, and in doing so, he had found a new path, a path that was not defined by fame or money, but by the power of staying true to oneself. His work was no longer about fitting into a mold. It was about breaking that mold open and creating something new. Something real. Something that mattered. And as he stood in that small gallery, surrounded by people who appreciated his art for what it truly was, Marcus realized that he had already achieved the ultimate success. He had stayed true to his vision, and in doing so, he had found a community that valued him, not as a product, but as an artist. This was the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus was ready to embrace it. Months passed since the gallery exhibition, and Marcus's life was slowly but steadily transforming. The change was subtle, but profound. While the art world had not quite returned to the level of fame he had once enjoyed, he no longer yearned for the validation he had once chased. Instead, he was building something that felt more meaningful, something that would leave a legacy far beyond the gallery walls. He had found a balance between creating for himself and sharing his work with the world. And the response had been overwhelmingly positive. His online presence had exploded, with thousands of followers engaging with his journey, his art, and his message. It wasn't about selling paintings anymore, it was about sharing stories, connecting with others, and offering a sense of hope and inspiration. Marcus had started something far bigger than he had anticipated, an artistic movement. His refusal to conform to the traditional art world and his commitment to authentic self-expression had struck a chord with countless artists, especially those from marginalized communities. They saw in his story the courage to embrace their own voices, no matter how unconventional or unmarketable their art might seem. Marcus's journey had become a beacon of hope for many who had struggled with the same doubts and challenges he had once faced. One afternoon, Marcus received an email that would change the course of his career. It was from a curator at the Smithsonian Museum of American Art. The museum had been following his work for some time and was deeply impressed by the direction he had taken. They wanted to feature a solo exhibition of his art in one of their most prestigious galleries, showcasing not only his paintings but also the story of his artistic transformation. Marcus read the email twice, disbelief creeping into his mind. The Smithsonian was one of the most respected institutions in the world. To be invited to showcase his work, there was an honor that few artists ever received. But for Marcus, the significance went beyond the recognition, it was a moment of vindication. His journey, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the decisions he had made to stay true to himself had led him to this moment. The curator's words were clear: "We believe your work speaks to something far beyond the art world. It carries a message of resilience, self-expression, and the power of staying authentic. We want the world to see that." Marcus felt a wave of emotion wash over him. For so long, he had feared that his decision to step away from the commercial art scene would lead to his obscurity. He had doubted whether anyone would still care about his work. But now, here was the recognition he had once dreamed of, only it wasn't the shallow, fleeting fame that he had once sought. It was deeper, more meaningful. It was a legacy rooted in authenticity. The exhibition at the Smithsonian became a turning point in his career. The show was a huge success, drawing attention from both the mainstream art world and new audiences. People from all walks of life came to see his work, and many left with a sense of empowerment, inspired by the story behind the paintings. Marcus had created something that transcended art. It was a message to the world that the most valuable thing an artist could do was to stay true to themselves. As Marcus's reputation continued to grow, he began to turn his focus to something else: giving back. He had learned firsthand the power of community and the importance of supporting others in their artistic journeys. He started a non-profit organization dedicated to mentoring young artists from underrepresented communities, offering them scholarships, workshops, and opportunities to showcase their work in galleries and exhibitions. The organization, named True Voice, quickly gained traction. Artists who had once been overlooked by the mainstream art world were now given a platform to share their stories. The workshops became a space where budding artists could hone their craft while learning the importance of authenticity and resilience in the face of adversity. Marcus became a mentor, not just in the technical aspects of painting, but in navigating the emotional and psychological challenges of being an artist in a world that often prioritized commercial success over creative freedom. Through True Voice, Marcus met countless young artists whose stories mirrored his own. Many of them had faced rejection, doubt, and pressure to conform to societal expectations. But they all had one thing in common: an unwavering belief in their creative vision. Marcus became a guiding light for these artists, helping them understand that their voice was valid, no matter how unconventional it seemed. One of the most touching moments for Marcus came when he met a young girl named Amara. She was a talented painter, but she had faced years of discouragement from her family, who believed that art was a frivolous pursuit. Her works were vibrant and filled with emotion, but she had been afraid to show them to anyone for fear of judgment. When she joined True Voice, she was hesitant at first, unsure of how her art would be received. Over time, Amara grew in confidence. She attended Marcus's workshops, where he encouraged her to embrace the rawness of her work. "Your art doesn't need to be perfect," he told her one day. "It just needs to be yours." Amara's breakthrough came when she created a painting that was so deeply personal, so full of emotion, that it moved everyone who saw it. It was a portrait of her mother, a woman who had always tried to discourage her passion for art. The painting was both a tribute and a declaration of independence. It was powerful in its vulnerability, and when it was displayed at a True Voice exhibition, it brought tears to the eyes of many who saw it. Amara's success was a testament to Marcus's belief in the power of staying true to oneself. Through his mentorship, Amara had found her own voice, and in doing so, she had inspired others to do the same. As Marcus looked back on his journey, he realized that he had come full circle. He had gone from being a young, struggling artist, trying to find his place in the world, to being a mentor, an advocate, and a leader in the artistic community. He had stayed true to his vision, and in doing so, he had not only built a career but had created a legacy that would continue to inspire future generations of artists. The art world had changed, but so had Marcus. He had discovered that true success was not measured by the number of paintings sold or the recognition received. It was measured by the impact one had on the world and the lives one touched. And in that, Marcus had found his greatest triumph. The story of his journey had become a part of something much larger than himself. His art, his message, and his mentorship were now a part of a movement that celebrated authenticity, resilience, and the transformative power of staying true to one's voice. Marcus had risen, and in doing so, he had helped millions rise with him. And that, he realized, was the true meaning of legacy.